Hi, I'm Michael Stittle.
And I'm Nik Nanos.
And Nick, it's our year-end episode of Trendline, and we've actually have some good news to report for once for 2020. Health Canada just approved the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. How smoothly do you think this will go for us?
Well, I don't know. Is there such a thing as a fist pumping scale? Like, I think a full fist pump is when the vaccine's rolled out and we've defeated the vaccine. I call this a half fist pump.
A half-hearted fist pump.
Not half-hearted, half.
Half
Because
fist pump.
it is good news. There's a significant number of Canadians, especially Canadians that are over 55 years of age, that are waiting for a vaccine in order to normalize. The big question is, will we do a good job at distributing this? How timely will it be? You know, the government's recently announced that it's approved vaccines. It's been trying to prepare. Provinces have been preparing to roll out the vaccines. But it's a big question mark, not just in Canada, but around the world. We don't know how effective or ineffective governments will be at distributing it. And the thing is, some of these vaccines are kind of like the 1-2. I was going to say 1-2 punch, but they're like a 1-2 injection. So it's not like, I think it's kind of like George Foreman said, and forget it. Like one and done.
Yeah,
is probably what would be the best. But many of these vaccines need 2 injections. So there's just extra logistics in all of this. So I think it's still a bit of a question mark. That said, I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. How's that?
Yeah,
hopefully it's not a freight train. How's that?
Hopefully not a freight train coming for us. And also just to be clear, this is an initial batch of Pfizer's vaccine. What do you think about vaccine hesitancy? How that will play out? We've already seen Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland say that she will publicly get a shot. Which has a long tradition. Back in 1952, Elvis Presley went on the Ed Sullivan Show to get a polio vaccine live on air, or not live, but So do you think this sort of vaccine theater is effective, Nick?
Well, first of all, Michael, I'd like to give you a personal tip of the hat for mentioning Elvis, on the podcast. Maybe we should try to do that once a year. So I didn't know.
Our yearly, I got it in at the very end of the year. There you go.
Exactly. I know a lot of our fans still believe that the king is alive, but he's dead. Anyways, that's a different podcast. I think it's good because, we saw in the United Kingdom earlier this week, a 90-year-old woman, the first woman in the United Kingdom to get the vaccine. She kind of said, if I could do it, you can do it. You should do it. I think it's important. People need to not only know that the vaccine is coming, but we need to have as many Canadians as possible to take the vaccine. The good news is that, the anti-vaxxer movement is really, at least in Canada, a fringe movement. That, the research suggests that the vast majority of Canadians are open to taking a vaccine and are waiting for a vaccine. So I think I wouldn't call it theater. That might be a little cynical. I think it's part of the public education campaign where everyone has to do their bit, not just in terms of social distancing and masks, but they have to do their bit in terms of getting the vaccine when it is their turn, in order for us to roll back this pandemic.
Now, we are primarily a politics podcast and YouTube show, so we would be remiss if we didn't end the year, Nick, with winners for the year. So would you like to take it away? Do you want a drum roll or? There we go.
Is that a drum roll?
Yep.
A pathetic drum roll. Do you know why it's a pathetic drum roll, Michael? Because I don't think there are any winners. Everyone's a loser. How's that? Do I sound like the polling Grinch? So think of it this way. Let's just go through. When we talk about winners and losers, many times we talk about politicians and political parties. So why don't we start with the current government? Could have been winners, looked like they were winners, March, April, May, and then that wee thing happened and no longer winners. So, a big disappointment for a significant number of Canadians on that front. So not a clean slate for the Liberals. The Conservatives could have been winners, but then they had kind of that weird stuff with the leadership and all the stuff that kind of transpired over that. So what could have been a big win and a clear win for them was much more of a mixed bag. Jagmeet Singh has been in a difficult position where he's wanted to keep the government to account and advance an NDP agenda, but not defeat it. So he's basically turned into a parliamentary pretzel, keeping the government alive. And and for Enemy Paul, I think too early to say whether she's a winner or not. But they did have a good leadership convention, about as good as it could be during the pandemic. There's a significant upside for the Green, and she's I'll call it a positive question mark. Right? People don't know a lot about her, haven't formed an opinion, but sad to say, how about let's not give out a gold medal, a silver medal, or a bronze medal to anyone, because I think for many Canadians, this year has not only been about disappointment related to the pandemic and changes in their lives, it's probably been disappointing in terms of what they've seen from many of our elected officials.
So no winners. Everybody might get a participation prize at least.
For effort, are we doing that?
Yeah. Well,
I'm old school. Effort, yeah. I want the numbers. We got to have the numbers to. But okay, if I'll be a little nice, why don't we say the provincial premiers? I think we can give a number of the provincial premiers a positive score as, can we call them half winners or potential winners, for a number of reasons. First of all, generally there's been good cooperation between the premiers. Generally, the premiers have been working with the federal government, and that the pandemic has not become partisan and political. So why don't we give a tip of the hat, 2020 Nanos tip of the hat to those premiers that have cooperated with each other on the pandemic and cooperated and worked positively with the federal government.
Well, there you go. Now our show is called Trendlines, so obviously we want to look at the big trend lines for all of 2020, and I know you've got a couple of them. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, okay, so the first one is what I will call the Nanos white knuckle. Do my knuckles look white? White knuckle trend line. That has to do with the pandemic. When we look at the trend line on the pandemic, coronavirus is a top unprompted national issue of concern. Check it out. We see the first wave and the second wave. And the big question is, will this continue to be a roller coaster ride? And this is why the effectiveness of the vaccine is going to be critical. In the ideal world, it's a two-hump camel, right? We had a one-hump camel, two-hump camel. Good news is there's no such thing as a three-hump camel, but we get into kind of roller coaster territory. So that's one of the key trend lines. The one thing to watch out for is, will it only be two surges and then we'll do a better job at managing this, or will it, Lord help us, surge for a third time as people worry about that? And then the second, and I'm going to call this the stealth trend line, because it's not on the radar. It's kind of there and people are thinking about it, but it is very significant. This has to do with the environment. We track people's the proportion of Canadians that identify the environment as the top national unprompted issue of concern. And you know what, Michael, when you look at that trend line in 2019, it looked like everything had aligned. You can see the numbers go up at the end of 2019. January in 2020 looked very good for the environment. It was like Canada was at a moment in time to deal with the environment, and then whammo, we had the pandemic. And you see basically the environment as a top national issue of concern fade away as Canadians are worried about their personal health and their economic health. So I say that's the one to watch, the environment, because Canadians still want action on the environment. But right now, the day-to-day issues that they're fighting have to do with their health, their physical health, and their economic health.
It should be interesting, Nick, in 2021 with a new U.S. administration moving in, with Joe Biden's team, where we'll obviously see the environment.
Did you say that Trump's moving out? I don't know.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm going to say it. Yeah, I think he is. Yeah.
Is he keeping the curtains? Will the curtains stay?
We'll see. Actually, you know what? I was going to ask you, talking about predictions later, if Trump will show up at Biden's inauguration. To be continued. We'll see. But in terms of political scandals, oh wait, I didn't finish my thought. I was going to say, with the Biden administration moving in, I wonder how much of we'll see environmental issues move at the forefront again.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, on the environmental front, Canadians, in the ideal world, for many Canadians, they say that we have to do as good a job or a better job than the Americans on the environment. It's part of our self-identity. It's when if the Americans are seen as doing a better job on the environment than Canadians, then it's kind of like, what's going on? Like, it's bizarro world. So the Biden administration has already sent a number of signals. The thing is that some of these signals might not be good for some parts of the Canadian economy. Keystone XL, for example, and for kind of the carbon part of the Canadian economy could basically take a hit under a Biden administration as it kind of advances its environmental administration. But what we have at least now is an administration an expected administration in the United States that will probably be a little closer to Canada, and probably will look to have normal relations. They might not be as great as other times, but I think it would be fair to say that the relationship between Canada and the United States will be more stable, and we won't necessarily be roughed up. Like, we won't have to wake up to the 3 a.m. tweet from the president on slapping new tariffs on aluminum. That won't happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. If it does, it'll happen during regular business hours, just like it has in the Canada-U.S. relationship for the last 100 years. How's that? But that's okay. That's okay.
It's been a long year in U.S. Canada politics news, that's for sure. And also for Canadian politics, political reporters, they've been keeping busy. What do you think your top scandal of 2020 is?
Yeah, it's a 2-letter word, starts with the letter W, ends with the letter E, we. And I'm not talking about the French we, I'm talking about the English we. That scandal basically took, the Liberals were I was going to say they're on fire, but that could be interpreted 2 different ways. The Liberals were on a roll at the beginning of the pandemic. The Prime Minister was seen as being proactive. They were very transparent in terms of trying to get the message out. They're very available. He was in the news every day. And the Liberals managed to put behind them some of the turbulence that they hit in the last federal election, which it might seem like 1,000 years ago, but that last election was only a little over a year ago, Michael. So
wow.
And then along comes this we scandal, and effectively erases many of the gains that the Liberals had, and they had a pretty tough summer. That said, the last month has been better. It's kind of like the second surge of the pandemic. The Liberal numbers have gone up as Canadians have focused on the pandemic and have focused on wanting to know what the Prime Minister is doing and what premiers are doing in order to fight the pandemic. So pandemic has made for good politics from a health policy perspective for the provinces and the federal government. But the pandemic the twist on the pandemic related to the we controversy and the potential sole sourcing of the contract and program to the we charity is kind of like the one black eye. And if I were the Liberals, I'd worry about anything related to sourcing of contracts and spending come 2021.
Now it's time to get into the old Trendline time machine, for which we still don't have a sound effect, unfortunately. But you have made a lot of predictions, forecasts for 2020, Nick, and I just want to take a peek back. So the big one, I think, was what you thought about the U.S. election.
Biden will win the popular vote. He hasn't had a major gaffe. He's had a stable advantage throughout the whole thing. So I think I'm pretty comfortable in predicting that he'll win the popular vote, assuming that all the votes are counted and mail votes count and are considered valid. But when it comes to the Electoral College, I would be very cautious because there are a number of battleground states that are a toss-up statistically from a polling perspective. And if they flip, then I would say all bets are off.
So I think a lot of people, Nick, saw Biden leading in the national polls. They didn't take your advice on to be wary of state polls, and then on election night, I think they were a little alarmed at how close it got. But for loyal Trendline listeners, I think we were a little less anxious about it, about trying to figure out what the heck was going on. So basically, I think you nailed it.
Thanks. Does that mean E for effort? Are you on the effort thing?
You get an official Stittle tip of the hat for 2020.
Okay, that's good.
There you go.
Thank you.
Well, let's move on to another prediction. You also, this is my personal favorite. I think leading into the conservative leadership convention, the conservatives were they ahead or behind
They
12
were
points?
trending up. Well, they were starting to trend up
Hmm.
as a result of the leadership convention, a little bit.
And right, and this is what you had to say.
Watch out for a recovery in consumer confidence after about another 90 days. And let's see whether the conservative leadership race can generate some excitement, because the conservatives it's like jumper cables. They need jumper cables on that party, because right now they're 12 points back. They need an exciting close in the leadership in order to engage Canadians and become more competitive with the Liberals.
Didn't exactly play out that way, Nick. We had that voting machine mistake. It was almost like a comedy of errors.
Yeah, and the thing is they did trend up to be statistically tied with the Liberals, and then it just basically all unwound as people were wondering what's going on. And right now we've had the Conservatives trend down at least for the last 4 to 5 weeks. So it's an important time for Aaron O'Toole to kind of what do we say? It's wintertime. Get those jumper cables back out, right? For the new year, right? Let's for him, he probably wants to put 2020 behind him. He wants to tick off the box like Aaron O'Toole won. Yes, he won, and then to have a strategy for 2021 and the potential election that could happen in 2021.
You've got some outstanding predictions. One of them is Green Party leader Annamie Paul. Let's listen to what you had to say about that.
Well, if you're looking at the political map of Canada and the polling and ridings that have the best opportunity for the Green Party of Canada, they would be in British Columbia. Let's face it, if there's ever a green revolution, it's going to start in BC.
So you talked about the secret trend line, the hidden trend line of the environment, which is we think will come back in a big way in 2021. So do you stand by your prediction that Annamie Paul will potentially find success in BC and get elected?
Well, I still think the numbers do show that the British Columbia is probably the best province for the Greens. They already have a couple seats in British Columbia. You have to think of, especially on Vancouver Island, there are a couple ridings in Vancouver Island that the Greens just barely lost. And then they have that economy of scale and the clustering of ridings where they can bring resources to bear. So that would be the easiest, as opposed to cherry picking something where there's not a lot of green members of parliament or any green members of parliament. So I still think today, looking at the polling numbers, Annamie Paul would probably be best served by running in a riding in British Columbia, ideally close to the other the green ridings that they have there. And there are 2 or 3 that could easily flip into the green column if she has a good showing.
Now, looking ahead to 2021, do you have any other predictions? I know that we talked about a potential federal election in Canada. Do you still think that there's a big chance of that happening?
Well, I think if you're the Liberals, so here's it's kind of like a bit of a moving target. So we have stimulus. I've always believed that for the incumbent government that they should probably want to have an election while stimulus is still being pumped into the economy. So the further they kick the can, the further away an election. If we find out that stimulus is going to end in the summer, for example, which some of it is planned at least to end in the summer at this point in time, then I would not be surprised if the Liberals by hook or by crook try to have an election, because it'll just be more difficult for them without an election. That said, the opposition parties are probably not in a rush to have an election right now. I think they probably want to see how the pandemic is going to play itself out and how the economy plays itself out. Because if there are fewer Canadians receiving support from the federal government, they'll just be more grumpy. And I would also expect predictions for next year is that all of the opposition parties are going to have laser-like focus on the tendering of every single contract related to the pandemic. And they're going to try to add to the we narrative. They're going to try to add fuel to the fire of the we controversy to see if there are other sole source contracts in order to create a narrative that the rules weren't followed the way they normally are followed under the Liberals in order to fight the pandemic. So two predictions. If the stimulus runs out, there'll be TikTok, I think, an election in short order. The second prediction will be that opposition parties will try their best to dig into the details of, the $300 billion in spending, the deficit that we have, and whether there are other we-like situations which might reflect poorly on the government.
Well, there you go. Nik, it's been a very chaotic year. I on behalf of, the Trendline team, for our listeners and viewers, I just want to thank everyone for sticking with us and hoping everyone stays safe and healthy for the upcoming holidays. And Nik, where can we find you?
You can find me at Nik Nanos on Twitter, or you can go to the website for all of our stats at www.nanos.co.
And I'm also on Twitter at Michael Stittle. You can also find more information about what Nik and I have talked about in this episode, as always, at CTVNews.ca. Thanks, everyone.